He came home from duty in uniform, rain falling hard, his K9 tight at his side. His wife wasn't waiting with love, but with papers already laid out. She forced him to sign away his home, his assets, and his military keepsakes. The K9 didn't bark. He blocked the papers, sensing danger first. To protect his dog, the seal signed and stepped back into the rain. As the door closed, the dog growled low at a scent that didn't belong. Comment where you're watching from, and like, share, and subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories. The salt air in Virginia Beach always carried a bite after dark, sharp and clean, like the ocean was trying to scrub the world down to bone. Elias Thorne stepped into the house with that taste still clinging to him. A man in his early 30s who looked like he'd been carved out of hard weather. An angular, rugged face, sharp jawline, clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes that didn't waste emotion, and a modern, neat, short, undercut haircut with tight, faded sides and a short, textured top that never seemed to move out of place. His disciplined, athletic build held itself upright without effort, the way men stand when their spine has been trained to carry weight and consequence. He was still in a complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers, properly fitted and fully buttoned, held by a plain black belt and plain black combat boots. No helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches or extra accessories. He looked ready for orders that never came, and that was part of the problem. Tonight, the orders were waiting at his own dining table. Atlas padded in behind him, full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9, 4 to 5 years old, lean muscular, deep fawn to mahogany coat, with a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, intense dark amber eyes. He wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar, and he moved the way a working dog moved even in a quiet house. Alert and steady, focused, obedient, mission-ready, facing the same direction as his handler, as if the two of them shared a single compass. Atlas didn't bark. He never wasted sound. He simply watched the hallway like it could shift, like a familiar place could become a threat in half a breath. Elias shut the door softly behind them, not because he feared waking someone, but because silence was how he kept control of himself. He could still feel the day in his shoulders, the long stretch of training and routine and men who spoke in clipped phrases, and he had been looking forward to a simple thing: warm light, a drink, Atlas on the floor at his feet. Instead, the house smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer ink, and the dining room light was on like an interrogation lamp. Audrey Voss sat at the far end of the table as if she'd been waiting for a verdict, not a husband. She was 31 to 33, light-skinned, cheekbones cut clean enough to cast shadows, eyes that stayed calm by force of will, lips thin with a polite smile that never reached her gaze. Her dark brown hair was parted neatly and pulled into a low bun or low ponytail, so controlled it looked like a decision, not a style. She carried herself slender and straight, posture perfect in a way that felt practiced, like her body had learned that control was a kind of armor. Even at night, in her own home, she wore the same single, deliberate look that fit her need to appear untouchable. Charcoal blazer tailored close, an ivory silk blouse, a black knee-length pencil skirt, pointed black heels that made a small, sharp sound when she shifted her foot, a minimalist slim watch, and a structured black leather handbag placed beside her chair like a quiet witness. On the table, she had arranged documents in neat stacks, squared to the edge, as if she'd measured them with a ruler. A pen sat precisely above the top page. Near her right hand was a small recording device, empty, the light off, positioned so Elias would notice it anyway. A glass of water waited untouched, a perfect circle of condensation beneath it. Everything about the scene said, "This is not a conversation, this is a procedure." Audrey's voice came smooth and level, the kind of voice that could narrate a charity gala without trembling. "You're late," she said, though Elias hadn't given her a time. He didn't answer. He didn't ask why she was dressed like she was about to walk into a courtroom. He didn't ask why the air carried that faint chemical smell. He simply stood there, calm on the outside because that was the only calm he had left, and Atlas stopped at his left shin, angled slightly forward, body between them without being told. Audrey's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Elias. "Sit," she said, and the word wasn't a request. Elias remained standing. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, where Audrey's smile tightened. Then she slid the top document forward with one finger, as though pushing a plate towards someone who had already said they weren't hungry. "Sign it," she said. The pen did look heavy when Elias finally picked it up, not because it weighed more than metal and plastic should, but because he could feel the weight of what she'd built around him. The first page was a temporary separation agreement. It was written in clean language that pretended to be reasonable, mutual, temporary, for the sake of stability. The second page was a property handover acknowledgement. The third was a no trespass statement that read like a boundary and felt like a cage. Audrey leaned back, crossing one leg with controlled elegance. "If you don't sign," she said, "I'll file tomorrow morning, and I'll tell them you're unstable." Elias kept his eyes on the paper because looking at Audrey's face would drag him into something he couldn't afford. She continued, voice still smooth, just enough edge to make it real. "I'll tell them about the nights you don't sleep, the way you stare at nothing, the way you go quiet for hours. I'll say I'm afraid." She paused, letting the word hang in the air like a hook. "You know what that does to a case. You know what that does to your access to this house. You know what it does to your dog." At the last word, Atlas's ears tipped forward. His amber eyes held Audrey in a steady, unwavering line of sight. Audrey didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around the water glass. "Don't," Elias said softly. Not a threat, not even anger, just a boundary. Audrey smiled a fraction wider. "I'm not doing anything," she said, "unless you force me to." There it was, the script she loved. She was never cruel, only compelled. She reached into her handbag and placed a small key on the table. "The safe key," she said. "And this." She set down a typed inventory list. Items in bullet points like they were office supplies, not pieces of a life. Elias's throat tightened when he read them. His father's old service ring, the unit memento coin he'd carried on deployments, the worn notebook he wrote in on nights when his hands couldn't stop shaking, the small wooden box that held family letters and a single photograph that mattered more than any room in this house. "Those will remain here," Audrey said. "With me, for safekeeping." Elias felt something raw rise in him, an animal impulse to snatch the list and rip it in half, to tell her she had no right. But rage was the exact trap she wanted. Rage was how she would paint him. Rage was how she would take Atlas, so he swallowed the impulse until it burned behind his ribs. Atlas moved then, silent, precise. He stepped forward and placed himself directly between Elias and the stack of papers, chest squared, head slightly lowered, posture steady and obedient but unmistakably protective. He didn't bare teeth. He didn't bark. He just looked up at Elias with a focus that felt like instruction. Don't. Audrey's gaze snapped to the dog again. Control him, she said sharply, the first crack in her polish. Elias didn't touch Atlas. He didn't need to. Atlas was already controlled. He was simply refusing to lie with his body. Elias drew a slow breath through his nose, the way he did underwater when seconds mattered. He read the pages again, not because he trusted them, but because he needed to understand the battlefield. There were phrases about voluntary, about mutual consent, about no coercion. It was almost laughable. Audrey sat there in heels and silk and perfect hair, threatening to ruin him with a story she could sell to strangers, and the paper had the nerve to call itself voluntary. Elias looked up at her at last. His expression stayed calm, composed, authoritative, because that's what a man had to be when someone was trying to turn his emotions into evidence. You planned this, he said. Audrey's smile returned to its measured place. I prepared, she corrected. That's what smart people do. Came not from Audrey's words, but from Atlas, because Atlas never reacted to theatrics, only to truth. As Elias shifted the top page to sign, Atlas leaned in and pressed his nose lightly against the margin. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but Elias noticed the smear, a faint gray trace like toner dust. Atlas's nostrils flared once, sharply, and he withdrew as if the paper itself offended him. Elias froze. The smell he'd caught when he walked in, the clean, harsh hint of fresh printing, clicked into place. These documents weren't old. They weren't drafted weeks ago during some careful, mutually discussed separation. They were newly made, newly handled, newly brought into the house. The ink was still alive on them, and Atlas's eyes, when they lifted to Elias again, carried a quiet insistence that made Elias's stomach drop. Someone else had been here. Someone else had touched these pages. Atlas's posture changed. Ears forward, weight subtly shifted toward the hallway, as if a memory of scent had just aligned with the physical space. Audrey noticed the pause and mistook it for weakness. She leaned forward, voice softening into something almost tender. Elias, she said, using his name like a leash, you can do this the easy way, or you can do it the hard way. If you make me go hard, I'll say you scared me. I'll say I fear for my safety. I'll say the dog is dangerous. And you know what happens then. She didn't say the words taken or put down. She didn't have to. The implication sat between them like a loaded weapon. Elias looked at the pen again. It wasn't heavy because it was metal. It was heavy because it was Atlas. It was heavy because it was the truth buried under Audrey's polished story. Elias had learned in his line of work that sometimes you couldn't win the first fight. Sometimes you survived it, and you gathered what you needed to win the next. He set his jaw. He let his hand steady. He signed the temporary separation agreement where she indicated. Audrey slid the next page forward. He signed the property handover acknowledgement. Audrey's smile grew warmer, like she could taste the outcome. Then she placed the no trespass statement on top, tapping the signature line with a manicured fingernail. Elias signed that too, because the alternative was a spectacle that could cost him everything. Audrey exhaled, satisfied. Keys, she said. Elias reached into his pocket and set his house keys down on the paper. The sound was small. It felt enormous. Audrey gathered the signed pages with care, stacking them perfectly. She didn't touch the recording device. She never needed to. The intimidation had done its job. She held out her hand without looking at him, palm up, expecting obedience. Elias stared at it for a beat, then placed the safe key beside the documents. Because she would take it anyway, and because fighting her in this moment would only give her the scene she wanted. Audrey's fingers closed around the key with the satisfaction of a collector acquiring a rare item. Her eyes flicked to Atlas. "He stays," she said. "He's been in my home. I've lived with him. If you leave, he stays." The sentence was a choke collar. Atlas's body stiffened, not with aggression, but with resolve. His gaze locked on Elias, and, for a split second, Elias saw something almost human there. Loyalty sharpened into a promise. Elias didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply gave a low, steady command under his breath, not loud enough for Audrey to hear, but enough for Atlas. Atlas stepped to Elias's side at once, as if the decision had already been made. Audrey's mouth tightened. "Don't do this," she said, and her voice had a flash of panic. Elias met her eyes. "You did this," he replied. He walked out. Atlas followed, tan vest catching the dining room light for a moment, before the dark swallowed it. The rain had started harder than Elias expected. Fat drops that struck his uniform and slid down the green digital pattern like the house itself was washing him away. He didn't look back, because looking back would be a kind of surrender, and he had surrendered enough for one night. He felt Atlas's presence at his knee, steady and close. Each step down the walkway sounded like finality. The ocean, wind slapped the side of his face, cold and clean. He breathed it in, let it burn, let it keep him upright. Behind them, the door shut. It wasn't a slam. Audrey didn't do messy. It was a controlled click, like a lock turning. Elias paused at the end of the drive beneath the thin silhouette of a street lamp, rain streaking down his eyelashes. For a moment, he thought the worst was done, that the damage was contained to paper and pride and whatever she'd taken from the safe. Then Atlas stopped. His head snapped toward the house. His ears went rigid. His body angled, muscles coiling under the short coat. And from his throat came a sound Elias had almost never heard from him. A low, tight growl, quiet, measured, but unmistakably serious. It wasn't aimed at Audrey in the dining room. It was aimed at something that wasn't visible at all. Atlas's nose lifted, catching the air that spilled from the house through the seams of a closed door. Elias caught it too, faint but sharp, now that he was listening the way Atlas listened. The scent of leather gloves, a stranger's cologne or perfume that didn't belong to Audrey's clean silk, and the unmistakable chemical tang of freshly used printer ink. Someone had been in that house tonight besides his wife. Someone had helped build the trap. Elias's heartbeat didn't speed into panic. It slowed into clarity. He set his hand on Atlas's shoulder, feeling the dog's steady power under the tan vest. "Easy," he murmured, not because Atlas was out of control, but because Elias needed the word himself. Atlas didn't stop growling. He didn't move. He simply stood in the rain, facing the house, alert and steady, like a sentry who had just recognized the enemy by scent alone. And in that moment, with water running down his face and his keys no longer in his pocket, Elias understood the first real truth of the night. He hadn't just been pushed out of his home. He'd been set up. The rain from that night followed Elias Thorne longer than the water on his uniform. Even as he drove away from the house in Virginia Beach with Atlas silent in the passenger footwell, the memory of Audrey's dining table stayed with him. The squared edges of paper, the careful alignment of a pen, the way her calm voice had treated his life like a checklist. That image became the doorway into everything that had come before. the proof that their marriage had never really been a home. It had been a file, assembled page by page, signature by signature, long before Elias noticed the weight of the binder. He had met Audrey Voss 3 years earlier at a formal event held in a waterfront hotel ballroom, one of those polished affairs meant to honor military service while keeping it safely aesthetic. Flags stood at the edges of the room, light glinted off glassware, and a low murmur of donors filled the air. Elias had attended in uniform, standing stiffly near the back with other service members, his presence more symbolic than conversational. Audrey had been the host that evening. She moved across the stage with practiced grace, slender and composed, her charcoal blazer and ivory blouse immaculate under the lights. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a face that seemed built for confidence. Sharp cheekbones, smooth, pale skin, eyes that held attention without demanding it. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. She shaped it, letting pauses do the work. Elias noticed her not because she was loud, but because she knew how to make quiet feel important. After the speeches, she found him standing alone near the balcony doors. She did not thank him for his service in the way people usually did, with exaggerated reverence or awkward pity. Instead, she asked him if the noise bothered him. It was a small question, but it landed. Elias, who had learned to measure people by what they didn't assume, answered honestly. They spoke for 15 minutes about nothing that felt dangerous, about the ocean, about the way public gratitude could feel heavier than silence, about how some men preferred structure to applause. Audrey listened closely, head tilted just enough to suggest attention, her eyes steady, her posture open. Elias left that night thinking she understood him. In truth, she had simply catalogued him well. Atlas entered Elias's life months later, not as a choice but as a consequence. A fellow SEAL he had trained with, a man Elias trusted with his life, was killed during an operation overseas. The dog had belonged to that man, a full-grown Belgian Malinois with a lean, muscular frame and a deep fawn coat darkened along the muzzle into a sharp black mask. Atlas was 4 to 5 years old then, already trained, already disciplined, already carrying a gravity that came from working beside men who did not always come home. When Elias took Atlas in, it was not charity. It was continuity. He did not speak of Atlas as a pet. He spoke of him as a partner, a remaining thread of a bond that did not break just because one person did. Atlas adjusted quickly to Elias's rhythms. Early mornings, long silences, the careful way Elias placed objects back where they belonged. Audrey had smiled brightly when she met Atlas, crouching to stroke his tan tactical vest for a photograph. "He's beautiful," she said, and meant it in the way someone means a compliment for something they intend to display. As the relationship progressed, Audrey's language shifted subtly from admiration to management. She began suggesting efficiencies, improvements, protections. She spoke of joint accounts as symbols of trust, of combined finances as a way to simplify a complicated world. Elias, who had spent his adult life relying on systems that worked best when unified, agreed without much resistance. Audrey framed every change as care. When she suggested moving important documents into a shared safe, she said it was because she worried about his deployments, about what would happen if something went wrong. "I'm protecting you from the world," she told him softly when he hesitated. Elias did not hear the other half of that sentence. By controlling access, she was protecting herself from him. Miles Ketter arrived in their lives as an answer to a question Elias had never asked. Audrey introduced him as a financial consultant with experience handling complex portfolios, particularly for military families. Miles was in his late 30s, tall but narrow-shouldered, with a long face and a polite, practiced smile that never touched his eyes. His hair was dark brown, neatly parted, his skin slightly pale, as if he spent more time under fluorescent lights than sunlight. He dressed impeccably. Navy overcoat, charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, dark tie, carrying a slim black briefcase like an extension of his arm. He spoke calmly, using precise language, and never raised his voice. Atlas, however, reacted to him immediately. The first time Miles sat at their kitchen table, Atlas paced restlessly, ears rigid, refusing to lie down. Elias noticed. Audrey dismissed it with a laugh. "He's just being territorial," she said. Elias accepted the explanation because trusting Audrey had become easier than trusting his own instincts. The paperwork began quietly. Miles framed each document as routine: administrative authorizations, mailing address updates, account access forms. Elias signed because the requests were wrapped in familiarity and reassurance. Audrey was always present, hand on his arm, voice calm. She praised his discipline, his reliability. She reminded him how much easier things were when she handled the details. Elias, who was used to delegating logistics in the field, allowed it. He did not see the pattern forming because each piece alone seemed harmless. Together, they were a map. One night, weeks before the rain-soaked expulsion, Elias woke to a faint mechanical sound that did not belong to the house. Atlas rose at the same moment, muscles tense, ears angled toward the hallway. The sound came again, low, rhythmic, unmistakable to anyone who had lived near an office, a printer feeding paper. It was nearly midnight. Elias moved silently down the hall, Atlas at his side. Audrey's home office door was ajar, light spilling onto the floor. Inside, a printer hummed softly, fresh pages stacked beside it, ink still warm. Audrey stood with her back to him, shoulders squared, reading something on her screen. When she turned and saw Elias, she did not startle. She smiled. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I'm just organizing." Atlas stepped forward, nose twitching, body rigid. Elias smelled it then too, the sharp tang of new ink, clean and foreign. Audrey reached out and closed the printer tray with deliberate calm. "Go back to bed," she told him gently. Elias did, but something in his chest did not settle. The house felt rearranged, as if the walls had shifted when he wasn't looking. After that night, Elias began to notice how often Audrey referred to their life in terms of records and contingencies. She spoke about "if something happens" with unsettling frequency. She corrected him when he referred to the house as his. "Ours," she would say, smiling. She encouraged him to leave decisions to her when he returned from training exhausted, framing her control as kindness. Atlas grew quieter around her, choosing instead to position himself between Elias and any doorway Audrey occupied. Elias told himself it was coincidence. He told himself he was projecting. He had been trained to doubt emotional reactions. That training, he would later realize, was being used against him. The night Elias was forced to sign and leave did not feel sudden anymore when he looked back on it. It felt inevitable. Audrey had prepared the stage meticulously. She had rehearsed her lines. She had chosen the timing carefully, waiting until Elias was physically present but emotionally depleted, until Atlas could be framed as leverage rather than ally. The documents on the table were not the beginning. They were the culmination of a process that had started the moment she learned how much Elias trusted systems and how rarely he questioned the hands that operated them. When Atlas growled at the closed door as Elias stood in the rain. It was not a reaction to that single night. It was a response to the entire file that had been built around them. Elias did not yet know how deep it went, only that the smell of ink and leather meant someone else had been writing his life for him. As the rain soaked through his uniform and the ocean wind pressed cold against his skin, he understood one thing with clarity that cut through the noise. Whatever Audrey had planned did not end with those signatures. And whatever came next, Atlas had known before he did. By the time Elias Thorne stopped calling the wooden box the box and started calling it the space where it should have been, he knew something fundamental had shifted inside his own house. The box had never been large, handcrafted walnut, corners softened by age, the grain worn smooth where his father's hands had opened it countless times. But it had always occupied the same place on the top shelf of the safe. Elias noticed its absence not with panic, but with a slow, disorienting certainty, the kind that creeps in when the world doesn't align with muscle memory. He stood in front of the open safe, uniform jacket folded over one arm, Atlas seated at his left knee, and felt the quiet thud of recognition. The shelf looked wrong. The ring was gone too. The unit ring his father had worn, heavy with history and sweat and pride. So was the small notebook he kept from deployments, the one he never let anyone read. These items didn't glitter. They didn't impress guests. They had no obvious market value, and that was precisely why they mattered. They were anchors. Audrey found him there a moment later, heels clicking softly on the hardwood. She didn't rush. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply looked at the safe and then at him, eyes calm, face composed, posture straight. "You're stressed," she said gently, as if offering a diagnosis. "You're remembering things wrong." The sentence landed with surgical precision. Elias turned to face her, studying the familiar lines of her face. Light skin unmarked by doubt, dark hair pulled back, lips pressed into a smile that had learned how to soothe and silence at the same time. "The box was here," he said. Audrey stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her clean perfume, the same one she wore to events where donors shook her hand and called her impressive. "You've been working too much," she replied. "You imagine patterns when you're exhausted. It happens." She closed the safe with a careful click and rested her palm on it possessively, like she was comforting an object rather than controlling it. Atlas's ears rose instantly. His body shifted between them without a command, stance firm, eyes fixed on Audrey's hand. Audrey noticed and laughed softly. "He's territorial," she said again, repeating the explanation as if repetition could turn it into truth. The losses multiplied quietly. A cufflink set vanished from a drawer. A photograph disappeared from a frame, replaced with an empty mat Audrey claimed had always been blank. Each time Elias asked, Audrey answered with the same line, delivered with unwavering consistency, "You're remembering it wrong." She never accused him outright of lying. That would have been too blunt. Instead, she suggested fatigue, stress, the residue of long nights and high stakes. Elias had been trained to interrogate his own perceptions, to question instinct when evidence contradicted it. Audrey wielded that training against him with expert care. Atlas did not question himself. Every time Audrey approached the safe, his posture changed. Ears erect, muscles taut, body angled like a living barrier. He would not sit. He would not look away. Elias began to notice the pattern even as he doubted his own conclusions. Atlas reacted to truth the way a compass reacts to north. That steadiness kept Elias from losing himself entirely. The storm that night arrived without warning, rolling in from the ocean with the kind of violence that rattled windows and swallowed sound. Power lines hummed once and then fell silent, plunging the house into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. Elias woke at the same instant Atlas did. The dog was on his feet, breath shallow, ears pinned toward the stairs. Before Elias could speak, Atlas moved, fast and decisive, gripping the fabric of Elias's sleeve with his teeth and pulling. Elias didn't hesitate. He followed. Barefoot on cold steps, heart steady rather than racing, he let Atlas lead him down the hallway toward the living room. Another flash of lightning illuminated the space just in time for Elias to see movement by the safe. Audrey stood there, her silhouette rigid, and beside her was Miles Ketter. In his hands was a long, narrow bag, canvas, reinforced at the ends, the kind used to transport documents or framed items. The sight burned itself into Elias's memory. Miles's long face pale in the lightning, his dark hair neatly parted, his polite smile gone, replaced by concentration. Audrey's posture was not defensive. It was managerial, like she was overseeing a transaction. Elias made a sound without realizing it, a sharp intake of breath. Audrey turned, unfazed. "The power's out," she said calmly. "You scared me." Miles shifted the bag slightly, as if preparing to leave. Atlas growled, a low, controlled sound that vibrated through the room like a warning line drawn in the air. Audrey's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Elias. "He's being aggressive," she said coolly. "This is exactly what I was talking about." The moment fractured when the lights flickered back on. Miles's expression reset instantly, his polite smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Paperwork," he said lightly. "Just helping Audrey organize." Elias watched them leave the room, Atlas pressed against his leg, every instinct screaming that something irreversible had just occurred. Morning brought calm skies and lies delivered with ease. Audrey poured coffee, serene and unhurried. "It was just business documents," she said when Elias asked about the bag. "Miles had to move some files before the storm got worse." Her tone was affectionate, indulgent, as though humoring a child. Elias looked at Atlas, who stood by the front door, nose close to the handle, sniffing intently. The dog's attention lingered there long after Audrey had walked away. The scent of someone else clung to the metal, sharp and foreign. Elias began to document things quietly then, not out of certainty, but out of self-preservation. Dates, times, small inconsistencies. He started trusting Atlas more than his own reassurance. 2 nights later, while Audrey showered, Elias opened her laptop. He had never gone through her things before. The act felt like crossing a line he had sworn to respect. Atlas sat beside him, alert, watching the doorway. Elias navigated the email client carefully, heart steady, mind clear. He found the trash folder and opened it without expectation. One message caught his eye. Deleted, but not erased. The sender was unfamiliar, the subject line nothing but a string of numbers. The body was brief: confirmation of receipt, access instructions, storage unit reference near the harbor. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Atlas leaned forward, nose brushing the edge of the desk, ears locked onto the screen as if the glowing letters carried scent as well as meaning. Elias closed the laptop softly, the realization settling into place with the weight of truth. This was not forgetfulness. This was removal. From that moment on, Elias stopped confronting Audrey. He stopped asking questions she could twist. He watched instead, He noticed how she positioned herself between him and the safe, how she redirected conversations when he mentioned his father, how she praised him publicly for his discipline while privately undermining his certainty. Atlas remained constant, a silent witness who never accepted Audrey's explanations. The dog slept lightly, always angled toward the hallway. When Audrey reached for the safe, Atlas stood. When Miles visited, Atlas paced. Elias began to see the house as Atlas did, not as a home, but as terrain that had been compromised. The email stayed with him, a ghost of proof he could not yet touch. He memorized the subject code, the phrasing, the location reference. He did not forward it. He did not print it. He waited. The storm had exposed something, but it had also taught him restraint. He knew now that Audrey's power came from his reactions. If he wanted answers, he would need to take a different approach, one that did not rely on memory or argument, but on evidence. As he lay awake that night, Atlas stretched out beside the bed, breathing slow and even. Elias rested his hand on the dog's shoulder and felt the steady rise and fall. Somewhere in the house, a plan was unfolding without him. But Atlas had already mapped the danger by scent and instinct. Elias understood that the next move could not be emotional. It had to be precise. The chapter of denial was closing. The chapter of observation had begun. Elias Thorne did not go to Rowan Hale looking for comfort. He went because Atlas had stopped sleeping through the night, and because the smell of ink and salt water would not leave his thoughts. He went because denial had expired, and anger, raw and undisciplined, was the one response that would finish what Audrey had started. Rowan's office sat above a quiet street a few miles inland, the kind of place that looked deliberately unremarkable. Elias arrived in plain clothes, shoulders squared out of habit. Atlas at heel in his tan vest. Posture alert, but controlled. Rowan Hale met them at the door herself. She was in her late 30s or early 40s, lean and composed, hair dark and cut short enough to stay out of her face without effort. Her eyes were sharp, tired in a way that suggested experience rather than defeat. She wore a charcoal suit that looked lived in, not tailored to impress, and carried herself with the economy of someone who had learned to speak precisely because time mattered. She had been JAG once. Elias recognized that immediately, the quiet confidence, the refusal to perform outrage. She shook his hand once, firm, then nodded to Atlas. "He can stay," she said. "I trust dogs more than most clients." Rowan did not ask Elias to start from the beginning. She asked him to lay the documents on the table. He did. Authorizations, account updates, forms that looked harmless alone and predatory together. Rowan flipped through them with practiced speed, stopping only to mark pages with a pen that never left her hand. "They built the cage early," she said finally, looking up. "Before you felt it." Elias felt the words settle in his chest with the weight of truth. Rowan explained what Audrey had been setting up, how a series of administrative permissions could be used to control access, how shared safes and redirected mail created plausible deniability, how a narrative of instability could be weaponized. "She'll try for a protective order," Rowan said calmly. "She'll frame it as safety. If she gets it, you lose access to the house. And if she says the dog is aggressive, she'll try to separate you from him." Elias's jaw tightened. Atlas shifted closer, sensing the change. Rowan noticed. "That's why we don't react," she continued. "We record." The plan came together not as a dramatic counterstrike, but as a ledger. Rowan spoke in steps, not speeches. First, establish premarital ownership. Elias had purchased assets before the marriage with documented income and inheritance. Rowan outlined how to reconstruct the chain: titles, payment histories, bank records, deployment pay statements, every link verified. Second, conversion and theft. The heirlooms mattered not because of their price, but because possession without consent was unlawful. "We prove removal," Rowan said. "We prove control." Third, neutralize the gaslighting narrative. "You don't argue psychology," she warned. "You present records, regular medical checkups, fitness evaluations, command statements, independent witnesses. You don't need to be perfect," she said. "You need to be consistent." Finally, evidence collection done correctly. No audio traps, no illegal recordings. Cameras only where lawful, video only, timestamps preserved, chain of custody. "If we cut corners," Rowan said, "she'll use it to burn you." Elias listened, the way he listened to mission briefings that decided who came home. He asked questions that mattered. Atlas lay at his feet, eyes open, ears tracking the room. Rowan paused once to observe the dog. "He's not anxious," she said. "He's assessing." Elias nodded. That was Atlas's gift. He read terrain others ignored. They moved quickly. Over the next days, Rowan arranged lawful cameras in common areas Elias still had access to, each one documented, each one placed to capture behavior without provoking it. Elias began a log: dates, times, movements, smells Atlas reacted to, visits by Miles Ketter, changes to the safe. He learned to write without emotion, to let facts speak. Audrey, sensing the shift, became softer, more public with affection, careful with her words. She praised Elias for getting help. She told friends he was under stress. Rowan anticipated it. "Let her think she's winning," she texted. "Confidence makes people careless." On the drive back from Rowan's office one afternoon, Atlas did something he had never done before. Without warning, he pulled against the leash, hard, forcing Elias to stop on the sidewalk near the harbor. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Atlas crossed the street with purpose, nose low, body locked onto a single direction. He stopped in front of a steel roll-up door set into a row of private storage units. He pressed his nose to the seam at the bottom, inhaled once, then sat, perfectly still. Elias felt a chill run through him. He checked the number painted above the door, just a code, nothing else. He snapped a photo, heart steady. When he sent it to Rowan, her reply came almost instantly. "Do not touch it," she wrote, "and do not be surprised. Dogs don't read paper. Dogs read truth." From that moment, the work intensified. Rowan subpoenaed records quietly. She pulled Port Authority access logs, storage facility contracts, payment histories masked behind shell accounts. She taught Elias how to move through his own house as if it were contested ground, how to keep his distance, how to let cameras do their job. Atlas became the constant, marking what Elias could not smell: fresh ink, foreign leather, a trace of perfume that didn't belong. Each note went into the log. Each timestamp narrowed the field. Audrey made her move exactly as Rowan predicted. She suggested mediation. She spoke about safety. She hinted delicately that Elias's temper had changed. Rowan answered with filings, not arguments. She submitted proof of Elias's medical clearances, character statements from command, and video that showed calm departures, neutral interactions, Atlas under control. Audrey's confidence sharpened, mistaking silence for surrender. Miles appeared once more, briefcase thinner than before. Atlas watched him leave, eyes tracking the door long after it closed. The storage unit became the center of gravity. Rowan coordinated with the facility through proper channels, freezing access pending verification. She did not rush. Time favors documentation, she reminded Elias. Impatience favors liars. Elias learned to breathe through the waiting. He learned to trust the process the way he once trusted a rope line in the dark. The message came late one night, a single line from Rowan that felt like the click of a safety disengaging. Tomorrow, it read. Let her believe she's won. Elias looked down at Atlas, who lifted his head and met his gaze, steady and sure. The plan was set. The evidence was moving into place. Whatever Audrey thought she controlled, whatever story she was preparing to tell, would soon collide with something that did not bend. Elias did not smile. He simply closed the phone and rested his hand on Atlas's shoulder, feeling the calm certainty there. The next phase would not be loud. It would be exact. The document Rowan Hale placed on the table looked harmless by design. Cream paper, clean margins, a title that promised calm, temporary asset arrangement. Elias Thorne read the first page slowly, Atlas seated at his heel, the dog's lean body angled toward the door, as if the room itself were a perimeter to be held. The agreement spoke in the language of peace. Minor personal items, schedules for council meetings, a temporary allocation of household expenses. It felt deliberately boring, the kind of paperwork people skim when they believe the war has already been decided. Rowan had written it that way on purpose. People fear what looks sharp, she had told Elias earlier that morning. They ignore what looks polite. Elias nodded then, jaw set, mind steady. He understood misdirection. He had lived by it. The blade was never where the noise was. Audrey Voss arrived 10 minutes late, as if to assert control before a single word was exchanged. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and a fitted skirt that moved easily when she walked, her posture straight, her hair pulled back into a precise low knot that revealed a face composed and unreadable. Her skin was pale and smooth, her eyes cool and attentive, scanning the room as if taking inventory. Miles Ketter followed a step behind her, briefcase in hand, his long face arranged into its customary polite smile. He had trimmed his beard into a neat shadow since the last time Elias had seen him, a subtle change that suggested preparation. Miles nodded once to Rowan, once to Elias, then placed the briefcase at his feet. Atlas watched him closely, ears upright, eyes locked. Miles noticed the attention and stiffened, but said nothing. Rowan greeted them without warmth or hostility. She wore the same lived-in charcoal suit, sleeves pushed slightly up her forearms, a pen resting between her fingers like a tool rather than an accessory. She did not explain the document. She did not sell it. She slid it across the table and said only, "If we're going to reduce friction, we need something on paper." Audrey smiled, a practiced expression meant to disarm. "I'm glad," she said. "I want this to be amicable." Elias said nothing. He kept his eyes on the page, letting silence do the work. He had learned that Audrey filled quiet with assumptions. She assumed his compliance. She assumed his exhaustion. She assumed that the man who had signed before would sign again. The meeting moved carefully. Audrey asked questions that sounded reasonable and were meant to establish tone rather than substance. Miles chimed in occasionally, reframing clauses as protections. Elias responded sparingly, nodding when appropriate, offering no resistance. He allowed his shoulders to slope just enough to suggest resignation. Atlas remained still, The only movement in the room, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Rowan answered questions precisely, never volunteering more than necessary. When the conversation reached the middle of the document, Audrey relaxed visibly, confidence returning like a familiar coat. "This all seems fine," she said. Miles nodded. "Standard," he added. The pen appeared. That was when Atlas stood. It wasn't abrupt. It was deliberate. The dog rose and stepped forward one measured pace, positioning himself so close to Elias's leg that their contact was unmistakable. Atlas did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, body firm, eyes steady, a living bracket around the moment. Elias felt the pressure and understood the cue the way he understood hand signals in low light. Now. Audrey noticed the movement and laughed softly. "He's very attached," she said. Rowan did not look up. "Proceed," she said evenly. Audrey flipped to the signature page, pen poised. Elias glanced at line 7, buried in a long paragraph dense with legal language. He knew the words by heart. Audrey did not. Line 7 was the knife. In calm, courteous phrasing, it stated that Audrey acknowledged receipt of full and final consideration and waived any claim to Elias's separate property and any assets derived from premarital sources. It confirmed she did not possess, control, or transfer any heirlooms or personal effects belonging to Elias, nor would she do so in the future. It was a confession disguised as closure. Audrey signed without hesitation. Miles signed as witness, his neat signature looping confidently across the page. That confidence was the mistake. Rowan watched the ink dry. Elias exhaled slowly and signed last, his name clean and unadorned. The paper was complete. They left with smiles. Audrey squeezed Elias's arm at the door, her touch light, proprietary. "I knew you'd do the right thing," she said. Miles nodded once more, briefcase snapping shut with a quiet click. Atlas watched them go, ears tracking until the hallway was empty. Rowan waited until the door closed before speaking. "Good," she said. "Now we move." The call to Detective Luis Navarro had been placed days earlier, timed to the minute. Navarro arrived that evening in plain clothes, his badge tucked discreetly at his belt. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face marked by fine lines that suggested years of patience rather than fatigue. His hair was dark with threads of gray at the temples, his beard trimmed short, his eyes alert and pragmatic. He greeted Elias with a firm handshake and Atlas with a nod of respect. "He works," Navarro said simply. Rowan handed him a folder. "Lawful access," she said, "and a location." Navarro read once, then closed it. "Let's go," he said. The storage facility near the harbor smelled of salt, metal, and oil. The steel roll-up door Atlas had marked loomed under harsh fluorescent lights, its code stenciled in faded paint above. Navarro unlocked it with the facility manager present, every step documented. The door rattled upward, revealing a dim interior stacked with boxes and long tubes. Elias stepped inside slowly, breath steady. The first box he opened held the walnut family box, exactly as he remembered it, the grain warm under his fingers. Inside were the ring, the notebook, the small artifacts of a life lived forward and back. He closed the lid carefully, a tightness in his chest easing just enough to breathe. Another container held medals, his father's, polished and wrapped, their ribbons intact. A long tube leaned against the back wall. Elias opened it and found items he had thought gone forever, protected now by layers of plastic and indifference. Navarro photographed everything, methodical and precise. Atlas stood watch at the threshold, eyes on the corridor. Then Navarro crouched and reached into a deeper compartment. He withdrew a thin folder, its edges worn, its contents neatly arranged. Inside were forged authorizations and scanned copies of Elias's signature. Clean, convincing, false. The air changed. Rowan's earlier words echoed. This was bigger than missing objects. This was a system. Navarro's jaw tightened. This isn't casual theft, he said quietly. This is infrastructure. Elias felt the truth settle like a weight he could carry. He had walked into a plan, and now he was walking out with proof. As Navarro sealed the evidence bags, Atlas suddenly fixed his gaze on the far wall and stilled, ears sharp, posture locked. Elias followed the line of sight and saw a fresh scuff on the concrete. A faint smear where something heavy had been dragged recently. The timeline snapped into focus. This wasn't finished. Someone had been here since the storm. Navarro met Elias's eyes and gave a single nod. We're ahead, he said. But not by much. They left the unit secured and sealed, the harbor wind cutting cold across the lot. Elias did not feel relief so much as alignment. The trap had closed exactly as Rowan planned, and yet the discovery in the back of the unit pointed to a deeper reach. Authorizations meant to move money, to alter access, to rewrite reality on paper. Audrey had signed away her story tonight. Miles had witnessed it. The law would do the rest. But law moved at its own pace. Elias understood patience. He had learned it under pressure. Back at Rowan's office, Navarro filed his preliminary report and promised warrants by morning. Rowan read the signed agreement again, satisfied. Line 7, she said, tapping the page. People underestimate courtesy. Elias rested his hand on Atlas's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth there. He thought of the pretty paper, the smooth ink, the confidence that had walked out the door believing the game was over. It wasn't over. It had just changed terrain. And on this ground, truth left tracks that even the careful couldn't erase. Audrey Voss woke up believing she had finally won. The night before, she had slept well for the first time in weeks, the kind of rest that comes when someone is convinced the battlefield has been cleared. She rose early, wrapped herself in a silk robe the color of pale ash, and moved through the house with ownership in her posture. The house was quiet in the way only victory makes it quiet. She poured coffee, set her phone on the counter, and dialed the property management office with practiced efficiency. Her plan was simple: change the locks, update utility accounts, and begin the public narrative of separation on her terms. She had the signed agreement. She had the witness. She had Elias's silence. That was supposed to be enough. The first crack appeared when the smart lock refused her request. Audrey stood in the foyer, phone pressed to her ear, her manicured finger hovering over the app as the screen flashed, "Access denied." She frowned, irritation flickering across her smooth face. "That's not possible," she said sharply to the confused building manager on the other end of the line. "I need the system reset. I'm the owner." The manager paused, typing. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "your name isn't listed as an authorized controller on the primary ownership file." Audrey laughed once, short and incredulous. "Check again." The silence that followed stretched too long. "We did," the manager replied. "The controlling interest is protected under a pre-existing asset structure. Any changes require authorization from the listed party." Audrey's hand tightened around the phone. She hung up without saying goodbye. She moved faster then, irritation hardening into anger. She logged into the utility accounts, electricity, internet, security monitoring, only to be met with the same result. Her credentials were present, but they no longer had authority. The accounts were locked, preserved, annotated with legal holds. Audrey felt the first edge of uncertainty slice through her confidence. She opened her banking app, intending to move funds into a private account she controlled. The transfer failed. She tried again, declined. A third attempt triggered a notice. Account under review, transactions temporarily suspended. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked unfamiliar, her calm cracking into something sharper, more desperate. The knock at the door came precisely at 9. Detective Luis Navarro stood in the hallway, posture relaxed but immovable, a uniformed officer a step behind him. Navarro's expression was professional, his eyes steady, his jaw set with quiet authority. He held a folder under one arm. "Audrey Voss?" he asked. Audrey straightened instinctively, her voice smoothing itself into composure. "Yes. What is this about?" Navarro handed her the papers without ceremony. "Service," he said. "Conversion of property, forgery, and notice of an active investigation into unauthorized transfers." Audrey skimmed the first page, her breath catching despite herself. "This is a mistake," she said quickly. "My husband is unstable. He set me up." Navarro's gaze did not change. "You signed a document last night confirming you did not possess or transfer his personal property," he replied evenly. "That document is now evidence." He nodded once and turned to leave. Audrey stood frozen in the doorway, the morning unraveling around her. Miles Ketter did not answer her calls. She tried again, pacing the living room, heels clicking sharply against the floor. When she finally reached his voicemail, she left a message that stripped away her composure entirely. "Call me now." Miles, meanwhile, was already moving. Security footage later showed him in a narrow office, his long face tight with panic, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt as he fed papers into a shredder too small to keep up. His neat beard had grown uneven in the last 12 hours, his hands shaking as he worked. He did not notice the camera until it was too late. He froze, eyes widening, then bolted for the door. The footage captured everything: his flight, the documents half destroyed, the timestamps that placed him squarely inside the window of the investigation. Audrey's new attorney arrived late and flustered, a man in his early 50s with thinning hair and a lined face that suggested a career spent cleaning up other people's messes. His suit was expensive but worn at the seams, his tie loosened as if he had dressed in a hurry. He barely sat down before flipping through the agreement Audrey had signed. The color drained from his face line by line. "Did you read this?" he demanded, voice rising. Audrey bristled. "Of course I did," she snapped. He jabbed a finger at the page. "You acknowledged full compensation," he said, incredulous. "You waived claims to separate property. You affirmed you did not possess or transfer heirlooms. Do you understand what that means?" Audrey's silence was answer enough. He stood abruptly, pacing. "You signed away your leverage," he shouted. "You didn't just lose, you documented it." His voice cracked with frustration. "You handed them the knife and signed the handle." Audrey's phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification, not a call, an emergency filing alert. Elias's name appeared alongside Rowan Hale's. The subject line was clinical and devastating. Response filed. Evidence attached. Audrey felt the room tilt. For the first time, the thought pierced through the panic. This hadn't been reactive. This had been planned. Audrey tried to regain ground by attacking the only thing she thought still vulnerable. She accused Elias of entrapment, of manipulation, of coercion. She framed herself as a victim of deception, insisting she had been pressured, misled, emotionally compromised. Rowan Hale responded without raising her voice. "Signing without reading is not duress," she said calmly in the recorded exchange. "It's a choice." Audrey's arguments collapsed under the weight of timestamps, witnesses, and her own signature. The law did not care about her intentions. It cared about ink. By late afternoon, the narrative Audrey had rehearsed for weeks lay in pieces. Friends stopped answering texts. The building management office redirected all inquiries to legal counsel. The house no longer responded to her presence. Every door she tried to open pushed back with silence. The victory she had imagined, clean, decisive, absolute, had inverted into exposure. Desperation sharpened her next move. With hours left in the day, Audrey filed an emergency motion alleging that Elias was dangerous, unstable, unfit. She requested immediate custody of Atlas, framing the dog as a threat and Elias as a risk. The language was urgent, dramatic, designed to provoke fear before facts could settle. The court scheduled a temporary hearing for the next morning. 24 hours. That was all that remained between Elias and the final attempt to sever him from the one constant that had never failed him. Elias learned of the filing from Rowan as the sun dipped low, the light catching in Atlas's dark amber eyes as they stood together in the quiet of Rowan's office. He listened without interrupting, shoulders squared, breathing even. "They're coming for the dog," Rowan said plainly, "because it's the last thing they can reach." Atlas shifted closer, pressing his flank against Elias's leg, solid and unyielding. Elias rested his hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the calm certainty there. "We're ready," Rowan added, "but tomorrow matters." Elias nodded once. He did not feel fear. He felt focus. As night fell, Audrey sat alone in the house that no longer answered to her, surrounded by devices she could not control and papers that now betrayed her. Elias walked beside Atlas under an open sky, the path ahead, narrowing into a single point of decision. The dominoes had fallen. One move remained. The courtroom was smaller than Elias Thorne expected, tucked behind a long hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. There was no jury box, no dramatic architecture, just wood-paneled walls, a raised bench, and rows of chairs arranged with quiet efficiency. Atlas walked beside Elias with measured steps, tan tactical vest snug against his lean frame, dark amber eyes alert but calm. The dog's presence drew looks, some curious, some skeptical, but Atlas ignored them all, focused only on Elias. Audrey Voss sat across the room, already composed, her posture carefully arranged. She wore a soft gray dress that muted her sharp edges, her hair styled looser than usual, a deliberate choice that made her look fragile rather than precise. Her skin appeared paler under the courtroom lights, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes glistened, as if the moisture had been timed. She was ready to perform. The judge entered, a woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. Her movements were unhurried, her expression neutral in the way that suggested long experience with drama disguised as truth. The clerk called the case. Audrey's attorney rose first. He spoke softly, deliberately, painting a picture of concern and fear. He described Elias as unstable, emotionally compromised by years of high-risk service. He suggested that Atlas, trained and powerful, was an extension of that instability, a potential threat. Audrey dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her breath catching at carefully placed moments. "I just want to feel safe," she said when asked to speak, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of what he might do." She did not look at Elias when she said it. She stared at the bench, as if confessing to authority rather than accusing a man she had once claimed to love. Rowan Hale did not stand immediately. She waited until the room settled, until the echo of Audrey's words thinned into silence. When she rose, she did so without flourish. Her charcoal suit was pressed but plain, her hair unchanged, her expression steady. She did not address Audrey's emotions. She addressed the record. "Your Honor," Rowan began, voice level, "we will not speculate on feelings. We will show facts." She laid out the timeline with precision. Timestamps from the storage facility, access logs, documented transfers. Photographs followed. The walnut box, the ring, medals recovered under lawful order. Rowan introduced the forged authorizations, the scanned signatures, each one authenticated. Detective Luis Navarro testified next, his voice calm, his weathered face impassive as he described the evidence chain and the attempted destruction of documents. He did not embellish. He did not need to. The room shifted, the air thickening with attention. Then Rowan turned to the agreement Audrey had signed. She read the relevant clause aloud, the acknowledgement of full compensation, the waiver of claims, the affirmation that Audrey did not possess or transfer Elias's heirlooms. Audrey's attorney objected weakly. The judge raised a hand. "The document stands," she said. Rowan nodded once and continued. "The petitioner's request to seize the dog," Rowan said, "rests on a claim of danger. We submit evidence that the motive is not safety, but leverage." She gestured toward the screen. "And now, Your Honor, we address the dog." The video played without sound. It did not need any. The footage showed Atlas in the house over several weeks, standing rigid when Audrey opened the safe, stepping between Elias and the door when Miles arrived, tracking movements with unwavering focus. Clip after clip demonstrated the same pattern, a trained Malinois exhibiting consistent alert behavior in response to the same individuals during the same actions. Rowan spoke quietly as the images unfolded. "This is not aggression," she said. "See, this is professional warning behavior. The same instinct that saves lives in the field identified risk here." Atlas lay at Elias's feet as the video ended, calm and present, unaware of the weight he carried. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying the screen, then the dog, then Audrey. The judge asked a single question. "Is the dog trained to respond this way?" Rowan answered simply, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge paused, then looked at Audrey. "And you were aware of this training?" Audrey hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. Yes," she said finally. The judge's gaze sharpened. That hesitation echoed louder than any objection. The ruling came without theatrics. The judge denied Audrey's emergency motion, citing lack of credible evidence and clear indicators of improper motive. Custody of Atlas remained with Elias. The court affirmed Elias's control over his separate property and heirlooms, noting the signed waiver and corroborating evidence. Further investigation into forgery and unauthorized transfers would proceed. Audrey sat motionless as the words fell, her performance unraveling into stillness. Elias did not look at her. He watched Atlas, whose ears flicked once as if acknowledging the shift in air. Outside, the sky was bright, the kind of clarity that follows a storm. Elias returned home later that day, the house quiet but no longer hostile. He placed the ring back where it belonged, set the walnut box on the shelf, and closed the safe gently. He did not celebrate. He sat on the floor, uniform jacket discarded, exhaustion finally allowed to surface. Atlas moved closer and pressed his forehead against Elias's shoulder, the contact steady and grounding. Elias rested his hand on the dog's neck, feeling the familiar warmth, the certainty that had guided him when paperwork could not. In that moment, the meaning became clear, not as triumph, but as alignment. The instincts that had kept Atlas alive had kept Elias free. He did not toast. He did not smile. He simply breathed. The trap had been real. The escape had not come from cleverness alone, but from trust. Trust in a bond older than contracts. As evening settled, Elias understood the truth he would carry forward. This had never been about revenge. It had been about stepping aside and letting consequences meet choices. He had stopped shielding someone from their own actions. And when he did, the truth found its way out. Sometimes miracles are not loud. Sometimes God speaks through timing, through instinct, through warnings we almost ignore. This story is not about revenge. It is about truth rising when we stop protecting what is wrong. It is about listening when something inside says, "This isn't right," and having the courage to pause. If this story reached you, maybe it was meant to. Slow down. Protect what is sacred to you. Trust that God sees what others try to hide. If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who needs strength today. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, justice, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and guide you through every unseen battle.